Hi, welcome to the program. My name is Penny Owens and I'm your host today. We're here with Santa Barbara Channel Keepers Watershed Programs Director Ben Pitterly. Welcome, Ben. We're so glad you could join us.
Hi, Penny. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Ben, could you tell us a little bit about Santa Barbara Channel Keeper?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Channel Keeper, we're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to protect and restore the Santa Barbara Channel and its watersheds, and that means all the streams, essentially all the streams and rivers that flow into the channel, using citizen action, education, science-based fieldwork, and enforcement. So Channel Keeper was founded in 1999 as a program of the Environmental Defense Center, and we became our own independent 501c3 in 2002. And we are a part of a larger movement. We're a member of the Waterkeeper Alliance, which is basically a movement of on-the-water advocates who patrol and protect our streams, rivers, and coastlines. The Waterkeeper Alliance was based upon this tradition of 17th century English, they called them river wardens, but these were basically people that the king would hire to patrol the rivers to make sure that poaching and other illegal activities weren't happening. And that's essentially sort of the type of work that we're doing.
Great. So could you tell me a little bit about your work as the Watershed Program Director with Santa Barbara Channel Keeper?
Sure, and maybe just to give a little bit of background for those who might not even know what a watershed is. So watershed, it's basically just a term that we use to describe the area, the boundary of land where when it rains, all the water will flow downhill just via gravity to one common point. So in the Ventura River watershed, for example, all the water that falls in the Los Padres, backcountry national forest, collects in those upper tributaries, Matilaha and North Fork Matilaha Creek, eventually flows down through the Ventura River, comes out at C Street. That's the watershed boundary. And my job as the Watershed Program Director, a big part of my job is to run our water quality monitoring program. So we have many programs where we go out regularly to test the water and try to identify pollution sources.
So could you, taking that a step further, could you tell us a little bit about Santa Barbara's Channel Keeper's work in the Ventura River watershed?
The territory that we work within actually extends basically from the Gaviota Coast to the bottom of the Ventura River watershed. We started doing work in the Ventura River actually back in 2001, and so one of Channel Keeper's actually longest running projects is our Ventura River Stream Team. So we started in 2001, actually in partnership with Ventura Surfrider Foundation. And it's essentially a citizen water quality monitoring project. And part of that is, has to do with how we use certain tools to do our job. And one of those tools is the Clean Water Act. Okay, and the Clean Water Act has several provisions, but one of those provisions is a requirement that the states are required on a regular basis to basically evaluate the condition of all the streams, rivers, and waterways in their area. Okay, and they're actually required by law to consider any water quality data that is submitted to them. And there's this process whereby if monitoring identifies
a problem,
a regular, right, exactly, some kind of, chronic water quality problem. If you have enough data to support it, the state will actually take that water body and put it on this separate list that identifies it as an impaired water body, and basically that just triggers a series of additional sort of regulatory steps that are then taken to try to improve water quality. One of the ways that we use our water quality data is we plug it into that process. Another way we use our data, another type of monitoring we do, is to actually identify, when we identify specific pollution sources, we may sample the end of pipes and kind of that more traditional type of like pollution monitoring that people think about.
So it sounds like Channel Keeper has a citizen water quality monitoring program going on the Ventura River. Could you tell us a little bit more about Ventura River Stream Team?
Yeah, so Stream Team, like I said, we're going on, basically this is our 10th year, and basically the way it works is we have volunteers from the community. We meet the second Saturday of the month. We meet as a group, usually in the morning. Channel Keeper will bring kits, water quality sampling kits. We've got electronic meters. We've got sampling, different types of bottles that we collect samples in, and we send out teams to multiple sites throughout the watershed. So we have up to 15 sites distributed throughout the Ventura River watershed. Some of them are on the main stem, so we start at the lagoon and we work our way up, and we have sites along San Antonio Creek, Cañada Larga, sites in the headwater, Matilaha Creek, and North Fork, Matilaha.
So that's the farthest north or top part of the watershed.
Yeah, and especially maybe that North Fork Matilaha Creek tends to serve as like a background site that you can compare water results to.
Great. How do you get most of your volunteers for this program?
Many of our volunteers are Surfrider volunteers. We also get a lot of students.
Could you tell us all a little bit more about the water quality, how it is in the Ventura River?
Sure. So we test, I can tell you about the results from our testing. So every month we test the water for standard fecal indicator bacteria. We also have a partnership with UC Santa Barbara's long-term ecological research program. They analyze for nutrients, things like nitrate, phosphate, essentially fertilizers that end up in the waterway. And then we look at other standard water quality parameters, so things like pH, dissolved oxygen levels, conductivity, temperature, and we've done quite a lot of work monitoring stream flow as well.
You mentioned that there were some things that Santa Barbara Channel Keeper can't test for.
Right.
Can you tell us a little more about why we can't test for them?
What we know now, typically wet weather, it's safe to say water quality probably isn't very good during and after storms, and that's just due to all the runoff from all the different land uses that we have, agricultural land uses, urban runoff. They all contribute to water quality problems when it rains. Dry weather conditions, are actually probably not that bad, especially some of the background streams like the upper watershed. Water quality is generally pretty good, and a lot of that just has to do with the level of development in the watershed. So the Ventura River watershed's something like 70% undeveloped. A lot of it's just national forest, and so the water up there is good. As you get lower down, we have identified some hot spots. Parts of San Antonio Creek tend to have issues with fecal indicator bacteria and nutrients. Cañada Larga Canyon, we've documented kind of choronic water quality issues, and then some of that, as the water works its way down to the bottom, gets naturally filtered out, right? So, and that's one of the benefits that streams, wetlands provide, is that they actually improve water quality, while the water's flowing down. Plants and different biological processes are assimilating those pollutants and getting rid of them. As a consequence, though, we do have other byproducts of that. And in the Ventura River, one of those byproducts is plant and algae growth, which is the result of nutrients being put in the watershed. So I'd say those issues with algae, some issues with indicator bacteria, nutrients, and then we know we do have a quite significant trash problem, especially on the lower river.
And there's some parameters that Channel Keeper can't test for.
We would love to be able to monitor for is something that's these things called contaminants of emerging concern. We have the Ojai Valley Sanitary District actually discharges sewage effluent to the lower river, which isn't uncommon, and it's treated effluent. Okay, but I think one of the things that researchers are starting to recognize is that there are some byproducts of our sewage, things like pharmaceutical products and things like that. We don't have the capability to test for contaminants of emerging concern, and primarily it has to do with funding. It's expensive to test and sample for, and as a nonprofit with limited funding, we are somewhat limited.
Where does Channel Keeper get funding for its existing monitoring efforts?
We started out, actually, the city of Ventura provided some initial funding to get the program started. For several years, the project operated off state, it's called the 319 grant, but essentially state grant funding. And actually the last few years we had a grant from the State Coastal Conservancy. Funded a lot of the work that we were doing, and the fact is, not all of the work that we do on the Ventura River is totally funded through grants, and we do just depend on community support for a lot of what we need to do.
So now, in addition to collecting water quality, monitoring water quality data, you're also basically educating a whole slew of watershed stewards. Can you tell us a little bit about the volunteer involvement the Ventura Stream Team programs had over the last 10 years?
Right. One of the most important things that I think the program does is it does get individuals out in the water, and it builds this sense of watershed stewardship, so that they can take home with them a message that what they do does affect their environment, does affect water quality. We're all connected through the storm drain system, and so we've had over 500 people,
Wow.
Individuals have shown up, and each of those individuals receives training, and we have a quality control program that we follow to make sure that the data is accurate. But we've had hundreds of people have shown up. The teachers that approach us often have whole classes that they want to get involved.
Right, and we get them on the river, in the water, just like Stream Team volunteers. Right. We get their feet wet. I know Channel Keeper does some other monitoring as well. Could you tell us a little bit about Channel Keeper's other monitoring efforts on the Ventura River?
So one project that we've been pursuing for I think this is our 4th year now. It's actually something that is somewhat unique and pretty fun too, I think, for our volunteers. I mentioned that algae growth is an issue. There's also a lot of decomposition, like microbial decomposition, aerobic decomposition that consumes oxygen. There's also plant respiration, which we don't think about very much, but actually plants are consuming oxygen too. The problem is at night, all night, those levels are typically declining. And if you want to measure conditions at their minimum, you got to go out right before the sun comes up. And so you got to go out pre-dawn. And so one project that we've been doing for the last 4 years, we have a group of volunteers, we call it pre-dawn monitoring, and we meet every month through the summer algae season, basically from April to September. And we meet usually around 4:20, sometimes earlier, in the dark. We split up into teams, and we do some of this monitoring, and basically we're trying to catch those. We go out later in the afternoon, and we're trying to capture those extremes, those minimum and maximum levels. And it's something I think that even though it is a little bit painful to get up that early, it's actually a pretty cool experience to be out on the river with the sun coming up. And I think some of our volunteers have really enjoyed it.
And yeah, I mean, I've been there too, up at 4 in the morning, and it's hard to get out of bed, but it's a beautiful time to be on the river, and our core group of volunteers are very dedicated, and it amazes me that we've had no problem pretty much with our volunteers coming out 4 a.m.
When we started, we were like, who's going to show up?
Who's going to be crazy enough?
And now the way we do it, we actually need volunteers for both shifts. Through the summer, we're doing that type of monitoring during our normal stream team, so there's certainly opportunity for more volunteer. We need more volunteers.
Both in the morning and in the afternoon shift, right?
Right.
So how is this data from the pre-dawn monitoring being used?
Right, so there's actually a process right now. The state is developing what they call, it's a total maximum daily load program. It's called a TMDL, but basically it's a program that's looking to start regulating discharges of nutrients into the river. And Channel Keeper's nutrient database and this pre-dawn data that we're collecting is serving as the primary data set to facilitate development of that program.
Now you mentioned some pollution patrols. Could you tell us a little bit more about your work and Channel Keeper's work on these pollution patrols in the watershed?
Sure. So the type of monitoring I think we've been talking about, where we go out to a stream, and over time we collect, long-term data set, these like baseline conditions. We typically call that ambient monitoring. Okay, but basically we're developing a baseline condition that we can begin to detect improvements, or we can tell if things are getting worse. Okay, and in some cases, say we have a site upstream that's clean and the site downstream there's something wrong. What that tells us is there's probably some sort of input in between. Right. And one thing we try to do is to follow up and go identify that pollution source. We also know that during storms, we do have many pollution sources, and so we've been working to document and sort of determine the extent of stormwater impacts from those operations. We've also done some work, recently trying to identify and document impacts that may be occurring from some of the industrial oil development activity that occurs lower down, kind of at the top of the Ventura Avenue corridor. There's also, we have the Ventura River watershed is, it's a rural watershed, and there's quite a bit of agricultural land use, not just crops, but also cattle ranching. There's a lot of equestrian activity. There are a couple facilities that we know about where landowners have essentially constructed livestock enclosures directly on top of small tributaries. Right? Small tributaries. When it rains, I mean that flows straight to the river. It's essentially the same thing as flushing all of your animal waste directly into the river. And we've been looking to kind of document and monitor some of those hotspots. That
definitely has a big impact on water quality.
Some of them are probably have quite a significant impact. Not only so manure has nutrients in it, which is we've identified as one of the river's main problems. But there are also, there are diseases. There are zoonotic diseases that can be transferred from cow and horse urine and manure to people, and that's certainly something it's significant and we're concerned about.
So now earlier, Ben, you mentioned trash was one of the big impacts on the Ventura River, especially the lower river. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Santa Barbara Channel Keeper is doing to address this issue on the river?
One of our sites, one of our lowest sites, we call it Site 1, but it's at the Main Street Bridge. Okay, and for years, our volunteers, to get to that site, we'd walk through the floodplain there, under the bridge, and we notice in between every one of those sets of pilings or concrete walls that support Main Street, there's trash, there's dump sites. Some we can tell it's trash that's there from people who may be camping, and earlier, I think years ago, it used to be more we identified graffiti artists that were actually a really significant source of trash. So people use those walls, right, as canvases to do their artwork. And unfortunately, maybe some of the less responsible artists just leave their trash. And so paint cans, spray paint, hundreds of cans are down there. And then several years ago, we thought, we're down here, we know this is a problem, there's piles of spray paint cans, maybe we should start organizing cleanups, and we did do that, working with different groups. We started hosting and organizing, I'd say smaller cleanups, right? So anywhere from 5 to a couple dozen volunteers going out over the course of a couple hours, and I think Penny, actually, you worked with in coordinating some of those cleanups.
Right. So we've been really fortunate, and we've had support from the city of Ventura, and gracious donations of dumpsters from the local trash haulers, and they've been really supportive. And over time, as you mentioned, we used to be able to fill a dumpster in several hours. Our volunteers could. But in the last few years, we noticed we were filling these dumpsters a lot faster. We were able, with a small group of volunteers, to collect a really large volume of trash, and we weren't getting all the trash.
Right. We definitely noticed there's more and more trash, and actually, not just trash, but encampments themselves. It's gotten to the point where I actually think twice about when we send volunteer groups down there, because now it feels as though safety is even maybe becoming an issue, just because of the number of homeless encampments that we're finding. And I guess some of those cleanups that we did led up to, at the same time, the city started to get more engaged in organizing some really large-scale cleanups. And so for the last few years, I know that they've had a big cleanup. They've really spearheaded these large cleanups with something like over 500 students. I think they're working with Cal Lutheran College. A year or so ago, we were approached by a group called the Conservation Alliance, which is made up of a few local corporations. So it's Horny Toad, Decker's Outdoor, and Patagonia approached us, and they wanted to do a big community service event. And we said, well, hey, we've got a place, we could use a lot of help. Right. That was another cleanup that we worked with the city to coordinate. And I think that one, within like 2 or 3 hours, they collected 8 tons of garbage. And in total, I think, including that cleanup, the city estimates that volunteers alone have picked up over 35 tons of garbage from the river just in the last 3 years.
From just the lower river.
And so, yeah, the area we're talking about is basically from the lagoon up extending maybe a half mile or so above Main Street. It's a total mess, and all that's occurred since the last cleanup, and we started thinking, where is the impact, what contribution can we really make with our small group during our Stream Team event? Are we going to have the biggest impact? If I subject them to, cleaning up a couple of those piles, and I say subject them to because it's, as you know, it's a dirty job, and we're talking about, food wastes, we're talking about medical wastes, human wastes, drug paraphernalia. Okay, it's not something that you want to just throw your volunteers into casually, I guess, and and this is what we ended up doing. Would we have potentially a bigger effect just in taking that event as an opportunity to do a survey and map the extent of the problem, take photos, and then try to show people what the condition actually is? And so that's what we did. So for our March event, with support from, we got support from California State Parks. Our volunteers, we split into 2 groups, and we conducted a survey of dump sites and campsites on public lands below Highway 101, basically from Highway 101 to the bridge. And we compiled those results into a short kind of photo report, calculated some statistics. I think we mapped 33 dump sites. And so those, when I say dump sites, those are like, we mapped the areas where trash was really, accumulated into like, areas that you can define with like a GPS point. Wow. There's trash everywhere, scattered. These are 33 like really concentrated piles. And I think of those 30, we also mapped 13 active latrines. We put that all in our report, and we released that at the end of the month. We sent that out to basically as many people as we could. We issued a press release, and we sent it to local public elected officials and agency staff who we know are working on this issue. The main purpose of doing this and releasing this report was really that we wanted people to be aware about what's going on down there. And I think one of the most amazing things about this situation is it's really out of sight, out of mind. I'm not going to send volunteers down there. You're totally isolated. It's a totally different world down there. People do not know how bad it is down there. It's a sensitive environmental habitat, right? And people living in that vicinity, they displace wildlife. They do. They trample vegetation. There's networks of trails, campsites, so vegetation is impacted. Many individuals have pets, so they have dogs, cats. We mentioned sewage, right? And again, there's a good reason to not want to surf right in front of the river mouth when it rains. There is. It's kind of scary stuff down there. And people used to be connected to the river, and they use the river on a daily basis, and that doesn't exist anymore. And it's partly because we've built a levee on the lower river, and that's just physically isolated people. And then we have policies that keep people out. And while we have policies that keep people out of the river, we choose not to enforce those policies because it's a big problem when we don't know how to deal with it. And the result, though, is that the people that you want to be using the river, those just everyday people who want to be able to recreate and use it as a resource aren't in there, but because it's a safety issue. And I know that spoke with some of the law enforcement staff that helped us with our survey, and you know, they mentioned that there have been times when, you know, police have found you know, people with warrants out for their arrest for violent crimes. I mean, they use the river as a hideout. It's not to say that all the people down there are dangerous, but it's certainly not somewhere where you feel safe.
So this is a really complicated issue. What are some of the other complications with this, with all the homelessness and the trash on the lower river?
Right. So, and from Channel Keeper's perspective, I mean, we're a water quality watchdog, right? And I think this issue has, more so than maybe some other issues that we work on, forced us to acknowledge that it's not just an environmental issue, it's also an extremely complex social issue. You know, the trash problem is not going to get better until we don't allow encampments down there, okay? That said, it's not an easy thing to do just to go kick hundreds of people, literally hundreds, out of the river, right? So for one, there's many different landowners, so it's not like one entity. It's not like the city owns all of the land down there, okay? So there's a lot of it's private property. We've got the city of Ventura, California State Parks, and Ventura County also own property there. To the extent that any one of those groups does want to patrol and keep the area, like, free of encampments, that's just going to displace those people, right? They're going to have to go somewhere. And if there's not coordination, they're just going to go to another part on the river, right? Just further concentrated. So there has to be coordination. If you kick them out of the river, if people don't have alternative housing options available to them, where do they go? And it becomes this burden on the community. It becomes a blight. It's bad for business, and it has those impacts. You know, at the same time, it's not necessarily fair to say you can't be here, we're going to send you to jail, right? So it's like, and there are people who, even if there are alternative housing options available, they'll choose not to use them. You know, Ventura County has a 10-year plan to end homelessness, and it actually outlines a strategy to develop a certain number of, you know, different types of alternative housing options. It's going to take more than Channel Keeper, you know, or some social service organization to make that happen.
Right.
This is going to need community support, and that's not going to happen until people understand how big the impact is down there.
Well, we're at the close of our program here today. Thanks so much, Ben, for joining us and teaching us a little bit about Santa Barbara Channel Keeper and their work on the Ventura River watershed.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
We'd like to thank you at home for watching. I'm Penny Owens, your host today with Santa Barbara Channel Keeper. Thanks again.